Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of the Ask a Cycling Coach podcast.
New intro.
Yeah, here we are. We're live today, actually, on Facebook. We have people joining us. This is the Ask a Cycling Coach podcast, the only podcast dedicated to making you a faster cyclist. This is where we answer all your cycling and triathlon related questions, and you can submit them to us at TrainerRoad.com/podcast. I'm here with our head coach, Chad Timmerman.
Hi, everybody.
Our CEO, Nate Pearson.
Hello.
And we are going to get into a few things before we go into the questions. Firstly, for those of you that joined us just a few weeks ago, we had our first actual live recording at the Rafa Cycle Club in San Francisco with Matt Fitzgerald. That was a ton of fun.
It was good.
It was a blast.
Someone just yesterday told me how good it was.
Yeah.
And I believe them.
We missed Chad. Chad wasn't able to make it. He'll be at the next one, I'm sure. So
yeah, you watched it.
Yeah. It was awesome. We did a deep dive on sports psychology for anybody that hasn't looked into it, and how you can use the brain to get faster, and a lot of actionable tips on that too, which was, I feel like, pretty cool. So
if you haven't listened to it, stop, go back, listen to it.
We did a group ride thereafter. It was a ton of fun.
Dude, fast people.
Yeah, it was kind of funny because it was a broad, really broad spectrum of abilities, right, that we had. But I was shocked. We're going up one of the climbs, and I'm like, man, this is actually this is a pretty darn fast group ride. And then I was like, well, everybody uses TrainerRoad. I guess it makes sense, But
but I think too, we had just listened to that podcast, and people were going hard. I know we went into, what is it, Hawk Hill? It's a famous climb outside the Golden Gate Bridge. Yeah. And leading into that, I think it was like 400 watts for like 3 minutes or something into the climb before we started the climb.
Yeah.
Like it was a good one. So if you were on that ride, that was a hard pace. Okay. Jamie was our leader, right?
Yep, he was.
That dude was fit.
Yes.
And
TrainerRoad user, mountain biker.
When he wanted to push it strung out.
Yeah.
But it was fun, and we all regrouped, so that was fun.
We regrouped regularly. There were PRs all over the place, and I looked at everybody's rides.
Beautiful.
Everyone was PRs.
Strava does that new thing, though, that if it's your first time doing the segment, you get a PR, which is very annoying.
Yeah.
Because you can't tell where a real PR is and where just like the first time you rode it.
Yeah,
so exactly. I had like every segment was a PR because I've never ridden there.
Yeah. For everybody else, though, that had ridden those roads before, it was
good weather. Did you guys get rained on?
It was like not a San Francisco day. It was sunny and beautiful.
Yeah,
awesome.
It was pretty amazing. Like at first it was a little cloudy and we all had rain gear on, but cleared right up. It was awesome. Thank you for everybody that came and for everybody that tuned into the live podcast on Facebook like you're doing now. Thank you so much. It was a ton of fun. We will be doing more of those, by the way. We had a bunch of suggestions on different places to go, and we know roughly where people listen to the podcast around the world too. So we're going to use that to guide things, but we'll announce that and once we get to the point of planning that. And I'm sure also thanks to the folks at Rafa, they did an awesome job.
That's a cool shop.
It was great.
Coffee was really good too.
Yeah, it was a good place. Well, I wouldn't know, but it was a good place. So
I have some comments that were on our first Facebook Live one.
Okay. You want to share the comments,
I
right?
do.
Okay,
yeah. First comment. There's a lot of comments like this, but Jonathan's hair game is on point. A lot of people were impressed with your hair.
Yeah.
That's a surprising thing.
Yeah. Those are the important things in life.
Yep. Second one. Yeah. Jonathan's hair game is so strong, I feel inadequate. And that was actually sent in from Coach Chad Timmerman.
There we are.
Sorry, Chad. People on the live.
It very much was not. I mean, I dig his hair. I just you guys and your hair.
No one said it about me. It was all about Jonathan.
Yeah.
Someone said, "Wow, Nate looks younger and cooler than you would imagine based on just the audio podcast."
That's great.
I don't know if is that a compliment or not. Like, I don't know.
That's great.
I don't know why if I sound old or whatever. Exactly. And then this one, I kind of threw me for a loop. Does Nate have any severed heads in his freezer? Sure looks like it.
I think that he was referencing American Psycho.
I think so, because I sent him back a little picture of
with the hair.
Christian Bale with Patrick Bateman.
Yeah.
But I also looked up the top occupations with psychopaths. Number 1, CEO.
I'm not surprised.
Number 2, lawyer. But number 3 is media person, television or radio, and that's what we're doing right now. So I've got 1 and 3, and you guys are 3.
It's kind of a done deal.
3.
Exactly, I know. So
if you haven't started,
I wouldn't make jokes like that about me.
Yeah.
Who knows what will happen?
Thanks. Yeah,
just kidding.
He won't do that. I promise.
That's not a threat. It's a promise.
Thanks everybody for joining us. It was a ton of fun. So we appreciated it. Chad, I know you weren't able to make it, but you wanted to send out some thank yous.
Yeah, this has nothing to do with the Rafa podcast. This is just a couple of random thank yous. A while back, we interviewed Emmett Kelly, the Irish triathlete who broke his collarbone in Kona when he was there preparing for Kona. Super good guy. He brought me some butter, or some butter, as he put it. And I've made my way through all of it. He brought me 3 pounds of it, and I assume it was supposed to be a pound for each of us, but it all went home with me, and it all got consumed
3 pounds
by
of
me.
Sticks?
Pound sticks. I mean, they were big
That's
wads of butter.
Kilos.
Yeah.
How many kilos?
No, they ain't kilos. But either way, super good butter. Thank you very much, Emmett. You're right. It is better than Marigold or Kerrygold.
Emmett brought this from Ireland.
Yeah.
In his
he went
suitcase
to pretty great
to
lengths.
Hawaii.
Kept it refrigerated in his luggage. Got it to us in Kona, which was no easy feat either. So yeah, really, really kind gesture.
With a broken collarbone.
Yeah. On top of it all. And then additionally, Andy Burbage sent me a book, and I wish I could remember the name of it, but it's about an ultra endurance runner who's doing one of those races in Mont Tremblant or Mont Blanc.
Tremblant. Oh, Mont Blanc. Mont Tremblant.
I don't know. I'm literally
I don't know.
20 pages into it. Enjoying it so far, but I just wanted to thank Andy. It was yet again a really nice gesture.
Awesome. Very cool. Something else that we shared recently that everybody should check out if you're a mountain biker, for sure, but if you're not a mountain biker, still check this out. Even if you're a triathlete, I think that there are a ton of principles in the How to Become a Faster Mountain Biker video and blog post that we have. And you can also listen to a podcast where we discuss a lot of these principles that we cover in those pieces. But we covered a ton of stuff that it's had a really positive response. Yeah. And people that are triathletes, people that are professional enduro racers, all the way down to, all of us, just average folks.
All the way down to me.
Like everybody's been, I feel like it's helped everybody. Yeah. It's pretty cool.
So to give you guys an idea too, on YouTube, this is our fastest growing video that I think we've ever done in terms of views. And it's a positive feedback because I think people learn how to really be faster mountain bikers. So give them the content and they like it. So it really is a good video. And if you enjoyed Lee's podcast, this is like just more visual aspect of what he was talking about.
Yeah, we truly were aiming to make that useful, not just an excuse for us to do something rad.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. That's the key is if we can make you guys faster, that's the focus with everything we do. So we also will be, and this is a teaser of sorts, but we will be working on how to make you a faster something else on a mountain biker coming down the road. So,
not a mountain biker.
Not a mountain biker.
No dirt.
No dirt.
Thank God.
Yeah, people can
taking a break from the
rest easy. So something else is coming down the pipes there, and we'll be actively working on it in the next little bit. Another thing I wanted to share, and this is a lot of things that we're covering beforehand, but we just posted another video about how cyclists can avoid losing fitness while traveling. And the reason that I'm bringing this up is we get so many people asking these questions.
Especially this time.
Exactly. You're traveling for holidays or you're traveling for business and you don't want to mess up your training plan. So we give you some really actionable and practical tips on how to be able to train remote.
And even if you're not traveling, just a training interruption.
Yep. And this is day before Thanksgiving. Yeah. A lot of people are going to be traveling. Yeah. And I was thinking too, we're live today. This is like one of the least productive days, I think, in America because it's the day before Thanksgiving and
probably
nobody works.
A good time to have a live podcast where people can just watch things.
You guys just watch it.
Yeah,
your boss doesn't care. It's okay.
And then Nate, before we get into the questions, you also had a couple other things to add really quick.
A TR user, Bob, I can't say his Pancrats. I always want to call him Packrat, but that's not his last name.
No.
He gave me an idea or sent me this really cool thing. It's $9 on Amazon US. It is a remote control to turn on kind of like a remote control power strip almost. You plug it into your outlet and you have a little key fob and you turn it on, it turns power to the outlet. So I have 2 fans daisy chained and I can start my workout and then I just push a button and it turns on. Then afterwards I can turn it off. Handy. I don't have to touch my fans. Sometimes too, you get your fan just angled just right and then you turn it and it gets a little wrong and you get on and off, on and off. It is so nice. And it's called the Woods 32555WD Outdoor Wireless Remote Control Kit. Weatherproof, 100 feet. Basically, on Amazon, this is what you need to write down if you're listening to the podcast.
32555WD.
That's right. 32555WD. A little dyslexia there. But it is
cheap too.
$9. It's like $9.09 or something.
Oh, wow. Sweet.
I know. It is.
I'm doing it.
It is awesome. So thanks, Bob.
Nice. That's a good tip. A little marginal gain. Because I know right now, especially it's colder, and I get into the garage, I do not want my fan on me in the morning if I'm doing my workout. So then once I can get warm and everything else, then I'll turn it on. That's smart. That's really good. Let's get into the first question from Gerard. He says, "Good day, team. Thank you for your wonderful series of podcasts. I've gained a lot of insight from your discussions, and it has helped me understand a couple things much better. Often it is mentioned that a higher cadence," and he references above 95 RPM, "is preferred over a lower cadence due to the body being more efficient at those levels, if I understand correctly. Let's say we fix the power level to 300 watts, and I ride at a cadence of 85 RPM, and then later, at the same power of 300 watts, at a cadence of 95 RPM, so a difference of 10 RPM there. Why is my heart rate lower at the lower cadence? If the body is more efficient at 95, then my reasoning tells me that the heart rate should be lower at 95. What am I missing? Thank you again. Kind regards." This is a really common question of different variants of it, so we'll attack it.
Yeah, so people are always wondering why do we push toward a higher cadence? And basically, we're just trying to limit the muscular demand. When you think about what power is, it's velocity times force, right? And in our case, it's circumferential velocity or torque, right? So it's how hard you push on the pedals and how quickly you push on the pedals. So if you want to maintain that 300 watts and you're turning at a 95 RPM, that's a pretty quick cadence, so not really forceful pedal strokes. But then you drop that down to 85 RPM, then you're sacrificing some of the speed. You got to make up for that to maintain that same power output, which means you have to push a little more forcefully. When you push a little more forcefully, you shift the demand to different fiber types. So the slow twitch fibers, or the aerobic, the really high fatigue resistant fibers can't shoulder the load anymore. So now you start recruiting your faster twitch fibers, and you consequently, those are the anaerobic fibers. So you start using a little less oxygen. So that's a little less blood through the circulation, a little less, tax it, or you don't tax the heart quite as hard. Now you're working a little more anaerobically, but that's where the exchange comes.
And I like this to prove it to yourself. Try going down to like 20 RPM.
Yeah.
Right? Because you can go down to the extremes and you can really feel it then.
Yeah.
You might not be able to feel the difference in your muscles, like just between 95 and 85, but it's there.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And if you were to that's a good example of taking an extreme, right? Yeah. So, but let's assume that you're still maintaining that 300 watt number we're talking about, but at 20 RPM, you're going to feel like you're going to push your shin through your skin because you have to put out so much torque through those pedals at such a low speed, right?
Then as you get up to like 180 RPM, it's hard to be efficient. I mean, not even 180, but higher up. You just you're not pushing, your body can't do it.
Yeah, and part of that, I think people miss the point, is if you have some sort of flaw in your pedal stroke, it's a lot easier to control that flaw or that, the wavering knee or whatever it is at 80 RPM than it is at 120 RPM. And on top of it, you're magnifying it. So if you make that error 80 times a minute, now you're making it 120 times per minute.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I see a lot of triathletes specifically, picking a lower cadence. And then I see track cyclists obviously have to have a broad range that they can be effective at, but usually they tend obviously toward the higher.
I've heard solid arguments for the triathlon crowd to do the slower cadence. A lot of people argue that it slows down your running cadence. Some people argue that it preserves the muscles such that you can run better. I mean, there are strong arguments on both sides of it. I choose not even to get into it because they are pretty equally balanced.
I've heard of people saying you should have your cycling cadence the same as your running cadence, like 85. Christy Wellington famously had an 85.
Which is a good example.
Cadence for Ironman. Some people say for Ironman you want to have a slower cadence. I haven't seen any studies to show that. And I don't think, even if top pros do it, they might just do it because other top pros do it. Before Lance, everyone had a slow cadence because everyone had a slow cadence.
Yep.
And then Lance didn't, and now everyone had a high one, and now it's kind of shifted back down.
Yeah. It's kind of tricky.
I'm in my mind, self-selected cadence, where it feels good, as long as between that 80 and 110 is probably best, but be able to ride at all cadences because you never know what could happen.
Sure.
That's a very good point. And I think that I've seen a lot of people, for example, in mountain biking specifically, you deal with such crazy pitches and crazy changes in terrain like that you find yourself in situations where you have to be able to be effective at 50 RPM. Just thinking of single track 6, that long thing that we did,
I just watched a World Cup cross race, and someone named Van won because they're all named Van over there.
Vanderpool, yeah.
Yeah, it's all Van something.
Is it the one on the coast in Denmark?
Yes.
Such a cool race.
So many times I would see them, and it was good to watch pros race because they'd go to something steep, and it almost looked like they got caught in the wrong gear, and they'd get down to really low RPM, and I would probably be during the time where I got caught, I would try to shift into an easier gear, but they would just muscle through it at a lower gear. And then it must have been a gearing thing because every lap we did the same thing, but it was just they're able, in my mind, the takeaway was they were able to ride at a lower cadence at different parts of the course and not be freaked out at it, right?
Exactly.
Because you ever get caught out in a low cadence and you're like, oh, I'm in the wrong gear. It just feels not good.
Something that we saw, not this year at Kona, but the year before, we were right when riders were getting out of the water onto their bikes and heading up, and they go up that tiny little, that hill, I think Polani, right? It might be a different road. But they go up this little hill, and a lady took off, and her bike wouldn't shift, right? And she was stuck in the gear. Ring. And I hear that every year at Kona, or even in just different triathlons, like something has happened, and their bike is stuck in a less than ideal gear.
That happened to me at Iserman.
Yeah, and if that happens, then either your whole day can completely fall apart, or you're the type of person that's trained at a wide range of cadences within reason. You aren't spending too much time down at one.
Rigoberto Urán won a stage of the Tour this year stuck in the small ring. He sprinted for a victory in the small ring because he had to. So obviously a guy who can generate a lot of leg speed.
Yeah, there's mechanicals and there's course. So you might be a triathlete or road racer, be like, road's different. You might be a triathlete and say, oh, I never need to do different cadences.
Yeah.
But you have that issue. Like my front derailleur had a problem during the race and I couldn't shift down.
Exactly.
You don't want to be a one-trick pony anyways. No. You want to have a pretty wide array of capabilities.
And I think it makes workouts more entertaining, really.
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely.
It makes the time go by faster to do different things.
Totally does.
So the other point I want to bring up on this is sometimes people focus too much on the like parts of the equation and not the result. So like my heart rate is 2 beats a minute lower when I do this cadence, but can I really put out any more watts? Right? Like
it always comes down to performance.
Exactly.
Always.
And there's
always have to view it through that lens. I mean, whatever change you make, if you can't step back and say, yes, that improved my performance, then is it worthwhile?
And when you say performance, like we're not talking about your heart rate. We're not talking about that. We're talking about if it made you faster.
Yep.
That's what we're talking about.
There'll be so many products that will like something in your body that'll change. They'll do something. They'll say your blood lactate will be points whatever different.
Yeah.
And that's where the study ends because they look at the watts and the watts don't change.
Right.
Like for me, I don't care what really changes inside. All I want is like more watts. You know what I mean? I think a lot of inflammation is down XYZ, but they can't really relate it to better recovery or something like that.
Yeah, in the end, I think that something that I've noticed with cadence specifically is the fact that if I train myself at a specific cadence for a while, my body normalizes or finds a level of efficiency there. At first it will feel foreign. It might be difficult.
Yeah, that's the argument for self-selected cadence. I mean, it goes back to what we do most, we end up doing best.
Yep.
It's that idea.
Yeah, and with my self-selected cadence, I don't spend extended periods of time outside of 85 to 95. I try to stay within there.
Yeah.
But, the nature of it, I'm not freaked out when I have to ride at 110, even 115, even 120. And the same thing goes for 60 because I explore it.
To make this useful, though, Gerhard, if that's how you pronounce it, what it comes down to is you kind of have to keep all this in the perspective of what your event durations and demands are. So, if you're an hour-long time trialist, you can put this, you can make this as anaerobic as you want to. You're probably not going to run out of glycogen inside of an hour. But if you're an Ironman triathlete or even a mountain biker who's going to be out there for 2, 3, 4 hours, again, can you mash on the pedals forcefully for 3 or 4 hours? Probably not. So you have to kind of balance all of this with what works best based on the event and its demands.
Yeah, and keep in mind, I just want one quick kind of. I could see people thinking this is an edge case, thinking of single-speed mountain bikers, how those guys will just push a really heavy gear. Remember the fact that since they're on a single-speed mountain bike, as soon as things start to turn downhill and get to the point where they would be spinning too quickly, they're putting 0 watts into those pedals, right? Like they're freewheeling or they're just barely spinning their legs, but it's actually doesn't have any resistance. So even though they're pressing hard, they are getting the nature of single-speed riding is you press extremely hard, but then you also are forced to rest. Right. Whereas if you had gears, you could shift up and then have the responsibility to keep pushing. But with single speed, then you just focus on efficiency and rolling. So there's always a way. There's a way around that, I guess, is the point. It's not quite, I would say, an edge case that gets around this. So David was actually with us at the live recording in San Francisco. So he says, hey guys, thanks for a great podcast and thanks for keeping me company while driving home from the cyclocross races here in California. My question is a bit different from the usual, I guess. I believe I've heard you guys talk about being dads and how to work and how to fit in work, life, family with a training schedule. I've just entered my new life as a dad 2 weeks ago, living in San Francisco, and I love cyclocross racing. I was hoping to go to Nationals in Reno in January. Obviously, training has been reprioritized very low, and being a dad and not sleeping has been prioritized very high. I saw my fitness numbers drop quite fast, but have still managed to get a few rides in for the 30 minutes to 1.5 hour mark every now and then. On to my specific questions. What do you think I should focus on in these short training rides in order to be able to peak again in January? My goal now for Nationals, and he's Cat 3 in the 30 to 35 division, is just to show up and have fun, and if I get dead last, then so be it. Let's cover that one first.
Oh, okay, I mean, we've kind of talked about this before in terms of what type of fitness you need based on, and when it comes to cyclocrossing, you can race it a whole number of ways. So you can be the guy who's short or quick and punchy and stays toward the front. You can be the guy who maybe lets the field go away and reels them back in, so relies on greater muscular endurance. So with that in mind, I would recommend training which of those approaches works best for you. I would guess you're probably going to have to be one of the guys who kind of fights for placement. I mean, obviously you're not going to get seated well. Well, I can't say that for sure, but in any case, I don't think your fitness is going to be topped off, and most of the people coming to Nationals are going to be exactly that. So I have a feeling you're going to be trying to hold position, in which case you're going to try to grow your muscular endurance more than anything. So that's
a good point.
This is going to be a weird, I think this would be different than our normal advice, because this one at Nationals, when he's a Cat 3, he's going to be for points. There's going to be a bunch of guys who are Cat 1 who probably should be a pro lining up there, and they're going to just below, I mean, they're going to be super duper fast, right?
Yeah, and peaked and just ready ready to do
like the best,
what they can do best.
The best in the U.S.
And that's for Cat 1, you're saying?
Well, it's Cat 1, 2, 3, right?
So well, it'll be separated, but yeah.
They'll be picked separately, but they'll be raced together.
Yeah,
So,
exactly.
and then there's another race 2 days before, I think, that he could do, which would probably have the same guys in it. But
it's the non-championship race.
Yeah. So anyways, I don't think, no matter what he does, I don't think he's going to be able to like really hold on to the national.
Oh,
progress.
no. But something that comes to mind is when you start in the back of a cyclocross pack, and when you start at the front, it's this way, but when you start at the back, you have some serious surging going on.
Oh, there's always going to be surging. I mean, that's just the nature of it. It's like riding a criterium and expecting not to surge. It's just the nature of mass start racing, and certainly on a course that has varied terrain.
Yeah.
But so if he's only going to be able to do just a couple hours a week and 30 minutes to 1.5, they have to be very specific, intense hours, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I'd focus on VO2 max work. So again, going back to those 2 and 3 minute intervals. I mean, you can break it down and make it a little more interesting if you want to do 30-30s or minute on, minute off sort of stuff, but you're going to get the most bang for your buck out of those 2 and 3 minute efforts.
Yeah, I'm thinking of Apple Orchard is a workout that I've done actually that
those two, those are
mix it up.
Those are the ones that have the low recovery valleys, so or the high recovery valleys where they only go back to 88%. So those are the very race-like ones, and I would absolutely involve some of those too, but I think you need to build more of a basic form of high aerobic capacity fitness, and that's going to be with those longer 2 and 3 minute efforts with longer recovery valleys. Yeah. So 1-to-1 rest.
You just pretty much look at the cross plans and do that.
Yeah, and pluck them out. You'll see. I mean, that's basically.
And he could even do another strategy for this, knowing with kids, is to do, he could look at like the high volume plan, remove the endurance workouts, just pick the most intense ones. Because sometimes you might have 90 minutes on one day, and then you'll have 90 minutes 4 days later, and you could do 2 90-minute really intense workouts from the high volume plan.
And I don't think any of the high intensity workouts are longer than 90 minutes.
Yeah. Then you can skip though the fillers. I'm just saying you can, my point is you can adjust the plans to make it fit for you, where you may look at the low volume and be like, 60-60, that's not going to be, I have 30 more minutes and it's really precious to me. Yeah. And I know he's a fit guy too.
Yeah. And the mid volume plans escalate that duration to more like 75 minutes, and then the high volume more like 90 minutes. But in any case, any of those high intensity workouts, you really can't drag them out past 90 minutes and make them productive anyway.
And he could totally, to his schedule with a little kid, changes, right? So one day he might have 90 and another day he might have 60. Yeah. So you could go like to the different plans, right? And pick a 60 intense workout, then go back to high, then go to mid one day when he has 75. Yeah.
Yeah, it's tricky. He actually asked about that. He says, could you guys talk a little bit about how you felt and how you transitioned to being a dad and also work and train hard at the same time? Maybe you had similar experiences. And this is what he shares. He says, The way I see it is that cycling and training is such a big part of me, and getting on the bike, whether I'm at home or outdoors, is a way to keep me and the family sane. But I might be wrong. So far, I definitely don't feel like I'm neglecting anything, and I'm really enjoying my new life as a dad, especially enjoying my son. But he mentions the fact that his training's dropped, from 10 to 12 hours to 3 to 4 hours a week. So how did you?
Yeah.
I mean, Nate,
I got a lot of opinions.
You and I have been in this.
And 3 to 4 hours a week. He said he was at 315 FTP at 165 pounds. Yeah. Chad, can't you maintain, if you're doing intensity, kind of maintain around that? I mean, he's not going to be really super durable. But
absolutely.
Yeah, enough
3 or 4 hours. Yeah, if he does spends those 3 or 4 hours appropriately. Yeah.
Which means doing, focused on structure and high quality.
Yeah,
right?
and basically what we just said.
Yeah. And then into, so that would be over we have 6-7 weeks until cross nationals probably. Mm-hmm. So during that, you're doing all in high intensity stuff. I'm guessing he wouldn't need a big taper at all, because he's only doing 3 to 4 when he can usually handle 10 to 12.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he might not need any taper at all.
So he might be actually pretty good. Yeah, right. Mm-hmm. He'll come in probably pretty fresh.
Yeah. I wouldn't concern myself with the taper. Not
fresh because of the baby, but
yeah. Let's cover those challenges really quick though, because this is all ideal, and the one thing that thinking of the newborn stage. My training was just never predictable. That was the tough thing. Like, I've heard people say the baby's asleep and I can train. And for me, at least, it was not that way. Because if my son was asleep, there was no telling how long he'd be asleep for. We kept him to a really strict schedule and everything else, but still,
you can't control it.
You can't control it. So that was really, and I've heard some people, their baby's very structured with that, and their baby just sleeps and it's always an hour or something. And
They're
that's
liars.
Great. Yeah, that's true. Because with me, it was not that way. So the hard part for me was the theory of a plan was frustrating to me a lot of the time, because I would have something laid out in front of me, but then every single week it would get derailed.
Yeah, could you maintain any level of consistency?
No, and that's the hard part. And that's what I've found. We've talked about this before. My training or my performance on the bike is the best when I am consistent. Consistency, I know we talk a lot about, the exact intensity that you're working at and everything else, and all that is very important, but without consistency, it doesn't matter.
Exactly.
I'd argue that's the most important aspect of training.
It's really 80, 90%, I think, is to do the work. It depends on what workouts you're doing, because you can take people that are consistent and one just goes outside and rides. Another does quality.
Exactly.
But it's huge. And it's pretty much quality and consistency. If you do those two, you're 98% of the way there.
Yeah,
right?
Exactly. So how did you keep training
There's
going?
a few things. One, read a study that men who hold babies have lower testosterone. So don't hold your baby. Just kidding. I always see
your child.
I just see it's from what one study said that's true. And I always see Tour de France riders who just had a baby. I'm like, oh, they're going to lose some watts.
Don't touch that.
But
baby.
obviously, touch your.
That's funny.
Hold your kids. So my first kid, I was trying to race to launch TrainerRoad before my first kid was born, but I didn't make it. So while I launched TrainerRoad at the same time that it was with a 1 month old. It was hard. Yeah. And I initially stopped working out for both for a year for both kids being born.
Yeah.
Because that with the business, impossible. And I gained weight and stuff. Yeah. And it was each time, and I had a high FTP, and then every time I started over 180, which was
frustrating.
It's frustrating.
Relative to you. We actually had somebody, I'm going to jump in really quick. We had somebody mentioning the fact that you dropped down to 200, and they were I would give my left leg to drop to 200. But it's all relative.
But I was
all relative,
210 pounds at 180. Yeah. So
it's all relative.
That's not a good ratio.
Not going very fast at that.
Yeah, don't.
That watts.
When your pounds are higher than your watts.
Yeah. But that's where a lot of people start, though. So
that's where I started.
Exactly.
Right?
And so came a long way too each time.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I gave up on it. But if there's a few, I don't know. We talk about you first. I want to talk about the different stages of a baby and what my wife did, because my wife trained all the way through.
Okay.
So go into that, or you want to talk about you?
Yeah. I found the easiest time to train wasn't the newborn stage was tough, because my wife had just had the baby, and that was really tough. So the newborn stage was tough, but then after that there was a window from around 6 months until about 10 months or so that was relatively easy. He was just starting to crawl at that point, and then now this is the toughest time actually that I have, and he's just about 1.5 years. So it's the hardest time because he's learning about everything. He's walking around. He's getting into stuff. So it's like a really high maintenance time period. You just can't sacrifice, like if you leave him alone for 30 seconds, like my son has found like a butcher knife and a hairdryer and he's about to put it, or a toaster, and he's about to put it in the bathtub, right? So like, so I found that this is like a really hard stage. I was able to maintain 3 to 5 hours of training all throughout it. Yeah. And the main way that I did that was basically finding a window. And a lot of it was talking to my wife and saying, okay, can I have an hour here? And then if I have an hour there, then I'll give you an hour plus, more to be able to come to pay that back. So that's how we were able to work together to help me do that. And I was able to, this year, I was able to maintain fitness. I was able to specify that fitness within reason too for specific things, but I didn't see many improvements, right?
So you could just expect to do that, maintain your fitness. Yep. If you want to keep racing, just expect you're not going to see your best results. It's just going to be more for the fun of it, which sounds like what he's after anyways.
A huge mental thing is you have to say, hey, I'm just going to maintain and not build, or else you get frustrated.
Yeah, managing expectations with yourself is key with that. And something to keep in, just to put some numbers to it, like I had dropped down to probably about 275 FTP. And normally if I'm like, starting a base season, I'm probably somewhere around 285. So I dropped down to like 275, and then I was able to maintain and float around 290 this year, right? So usually if I'm getting into like peak season, I want to see around 310, somewhere around there, maybe even up to 315 would be great. But I was able to just hover around at 290.
Scale back those expectations.
Yeah. And
realistic. That's still pretty good. I mean,
yeah,
he's
still
special.
No, it is.
He's special.
Yeah, but if you can get your fitness to a high point prior to having your child, and then just accept that you're going to do everything you can to keep it there, that might be a more realistic approach.
And you know what it did was it forced me this year to look at so many little things to get, like I kind of looked at it like my training is somewhat limited and I just have to follow things, as I can, but I'm going to look at every other aspect of my performance or strategy on the bike to be better. And I feel like I'm much better at pacing. I'm much better at strategically reading a race, especially a mountain bike race. Those can be really tough because a lot of the time you kind of don't think there is strategy and everybody's just going out. But I found that it kind of forced me to be more efficient in other areas, which was cool. So
for those who don't have kids, Chad, listen up. Here are the stages that happen. When your baby's first born, they sleep a ton, right? This is actually one of the easiest times. I'm sorry, parents. Yeah. You don't think it is, but it is one of the easiest times. You have to get up a lot at the night. You can do training, and what we did, we got a little like pack and play, which is a little crib. We put that in the room with the trainer, and you put the baby in there. And if you do, I suggest if you are doing intervals, like probably VO2 max, where if in between your baby gets up and you have to do something for the baby, you just have a longer rest period. Yeah. So your 60-minute workout might take 2 hours. Yeah. But if it's a Saturday and you're like watching the kid, air quotes, watching the kid as this happens, and mom or husband can go do something else, and you're just okay with having a little bit longer rest periods, which we know VO2 max perfectly fine to have a little bit longer.
Yeah, depending on what you're after, base and build, certainly.
Yeah, and this is too just maintaining fitness, right? We're in this aspect, so it's better than nothing.
Yep.
That works really well. As our kid got to, and then what happens too is every parent I've talked to, they go like, oh, my kid's starting to sleep through the night, and they do start to, but then they get teeth. And then it starts all over where they don't sleep through the night.
Then they don't want naps during the day. Yep. And those naps start to disappear, right?
Yeah, and then the naps during the day, there's this sweet spot too where the kid can, like my kids could nap while with the trainer sound. Yeah. Like it was like white noise.
Yeah.
And they could nap there. But as they get older, the naps are shorter. So there is this sweet spot where they maybe wake up once or twice at night. And if you can manage that with your partner better, and then while you can really time the nap, and you just kind of pray and hope that it works well. Yeah. But as they get older, with like Jonathan's age, one thing that we did that was really good is the kid had their own room. We got rid of the crib. So we actually just took the mattress out and put the mattress straight on the floor. So there's only like this much room. And then the whole room is baby proofed. And I have like the shelves have like connected so you can't pull over the shelf. Anything they can do is fine. And then it's bad, but we locked my son in his room because what he would do is he would come out and open the door. But in the morning, he can get up and he doesn't cry to get out of his crib. He gets up and he just plays with toys. Yeah. It's good development stuff. He just crawls over, starts playing with toys. We can hear him. Some people have cameras. But if you want to in the morning work out in that time and say, hey, my kids, I'm always going to open the door at 7, right? And be consistent on that. Well, if they wake up at 5:30 and they play, and if kind of what I've seen is if they don't hear you, they don't think you're there.
Yeah. Right.
And as soon as they hear you, my son goes, I'm awake. But that can also be a good tip to like structure that training time in the morning.
That's a good idea. We've done the same with the bed, so that's a good idea to kind of open that up.
Yeah.
I think that there's that whole thing where you have a child and they say dad speed, which I've heard that term thrown around a lot, and to be frank, I don't believe in that, and I've gone through it firsthand. It's not dad speed at all, but what I do think happens is it forces you to be very analytical and efficient with what you can do on the bike, and hopefully this is giving you guys some tips.
And triathletes, the best, I mean, obviously, is you get a bob stroller and you go take the kids for a run. Yeah. And they have like, when it gets colder, you can do like the wind shields. It's like a rain shield for wind, and you can bundle them up. And what I do is, you touch their cheeks and touch their hands, and if those are warm, they're fine. Yeah. So you can go for an hour run, and they're like usually happy in a stroller, usually, but not always. But trainer and stroller is perfect.
Yeah, that's a good one. And hopefully this applies to a lot of people that don't, maybe if you don't have kids, but you just have a really demanding job. Same thing, right? So
same principles.
Adam says Wasson, and apparently that's Cornish for hello.
I didn't even know that was a language.
I know, right? He says cyclocross is now in full swing in the UK now, and I've been training super hard all year with cross season being my main goal. I've been so happy with where my fitness is, but, the dreaded but, I've been losing so much time out on the course with the sharp corners and cornering in general, especially on the right-hand turn for some reason. My question, maybe he's a good NASCAR driver, who knows? He says, my question is, could you recommend some decent drills I could do to really improve my cornering techniques? If I could nail these, I'll be flying. Just saying. Stay rad from Adam.
Stay rad.
So yeah, I know Chad's, obviously with coaching athletes for quite some time now, and then working with juniors, and then Nate, you've obviously like focused on improving your bike handling specifically too. I think we all have some stuff to add to this. One thing I wanted to open up with, I see a lot of people ask, if I was to ride the rollers, would that make me a better bike handler? Like people ask, like I'm considering these devices, and the pro usually of rollers that people assume is that it makes you a better bike handler. And Chad and I talked about this yesterday, and because I ride rollers, and I don't believe it makes you I don't believe it will help your cornering specifically.
I'm not sure it'll make you a better bike handler either. It'll definitely give you better balance on the bike. And if you can take that balance and let that benefit your bike handling, but in terms of cornering, for instance, or really anything else, riding in a pack.
It's subtle. Like it does, for example, riding with no hands is a whole lot easier and more comfortable for me now after riding the rollers all the time, right? I think the reason for that is because riding the rollers, since your front wheel is decoupled from your back wheel, it allows you, or it's not as stable, right? So it requires you to relax with your arms and your shoulders and your neck.
That in and of itself may actually make you a better bike handler. So if you learn better balance on the rollers and you can maintain a more relaxed posture regardless of the circumstances, that will certainly lend itself to better bike handling.
Yeah, if you ride outside and you go and take a water bottle, you don't realize how much torque you're putting on your handlebars when you like reach down and pull your bottle out and put it in. But then when you're on rollers and all that's decoupled, it's really made evident. So it teaches you to ride with your core. So yes, but honestly, I feel like the gains would be marginal compared to doing specific drills and other things.
Yeah, far better ways to spend your time actually getting outdoors and drilling.
Yeah. What are some drills that you've worked on before?
So ones we use, they're pretty commonplace in any coaching clinic or anything of that sort. Figure eights. So just like they sound, you just make figure eights and then reverse that direction. And as your skill improves, the figure eights get a little tighter to the point where you've really got your front wheel turned, yet it's still not challenging your balance.
How fast are you going?
It's super slow. There's no reason those need to be done quickly. You can save the speed for actual cornering drills.
Is this in the grass?
Done it on the parking lot. You can do it on the grass if you fear that falling is pretty likely, but it's very easy to control. And the speed, I'm thinking, 5-8 miles per hour.
Yeah, even lower in many cases.
Just those tight turns.
If that.
Yeah, because I've found that when you tighten things up with your drills in terms of the turns, right, and they're a tighter arc, once you get out onto the course, it's amazing. Like everything feels much less intimidating, right?
Yep.
Because you're used to something that's much tighter, even though you do it at a slower speed. So
well, we would do these drills prior to one of our local criteriums, and then they go out and race the criterium. And every time the feedback was, I felt so much better. I mean, it was immediate. Is that?
Yeah. So another one is, and this one is a good one to do on the grass too in the beginning, bottle pickups.
Yeah, bottle pickups or anything. So you can take a bottle and set it up high. Taller the bottle, easier it is going to be to grab. As you get more proficient with this particular drill, you can actually set the bottle on its side. We've had people pick up quarters. So, I mean, and get to the point where they can, it sounds ridiculous, but the fact is they get to a point where it doesn't matter where their body position is, they can keep their bike upright. Yeah. And that's a big win.
Yeah, so what those are, basically you set an object on the ground and you have to pick that object up while riding by on your bicycle. Mm-hmm. It's not done at a high rate of speed.
Yeah. Not pedaling.
Nope. You're just coasting by and you're grabbing that thing. And it's a really good thing to teach you that, like you said, decoupling and bike body separation is something that every person, triathletes, everybody should learn. Like even if you watch, I'm thinking of like Cancellara, for example, when he time trials and he's going over bumps and everything else, he's a very strong guy in that position. But if you watch, a lot of the time he'll hover, like, he'll lift his butt slightly from the saddle, or he'll separate his bike from his body just to maneuver around a pothole or whatever else it is. They're very good at doing that. And that's what I've found bottle pickups teaches you, is it's not over if you move from that position. In fact, it's totally okay. You can pull your arm all the way down to the ground and pick up a quarter.
Yeah, and it goes both ways too. I mean, your body maintains one line and your bike goes entirely in another. So that's just another type of decoupling where you just gain a sense of that it won't result in catastrophe if the two do separate things.
And I find that I don't, like in cross and mountain biking I'm better, but in cross, I don't do that. And that's probably why I'm slower, because you have to lean the bike, but then lean a different way, right?
Totally.
And this is, okay, I'm going to do this drill.
Try it. It's good. It's actually pretty fun too.
The best way you can do it with cyclocross is hand ups. So they're doing that for you all the time, right? They're giving you opportunities that...
Put that bacon on the grass.
Exactly.
Pick it up.
Get that $1 bill.
Yeah, they'll definitely put beers on the ground and everything else for you to pick up. So cross is giving that to you. One thing that we did with our juniors, I find that kids, especially when they start riding, they ride with death grips on the bars, right? And so the mountain bikes or road bikes, doesn't matter. You ride with a death grip on the bars. So we did a loop that's fairly challenging. Like I would say it's, above beginner abilities, but all the riders, the kids that I was training at this point, they're all plenty fine with that. We do the loop with both hands, and then I told them, okay, now you have to do it with one hand off, the whole entire loop.
Which loop?
It's a local one in Reno that's Podunk is the trail that they do. So it's like a short 1 mile loop, but if they're 1.5 mile loop, I think. But we would do it, and then after that, you'd have to ride it with just your left hand on the bars.
Even like downhill?
Even downhill. And then just your right hand on the bars. I did tell them that if there was a situation, I tried to pick the trail appropriately.
Safety first, yeah.
Yeah, that trail didn't have a situation where I felt like, if they were braking with their front brake, it wasn't steep enough to cause any problems, right? So don't send them down a gnarly downhill trail and say to do that.
Yeah,
so
one brake.
There's no rock gardens. There are little rocky sections, but there's nothing like really dangerous. And I would have them ride with one hand, and everybody would say in the beginning, oh my goodness, I'm so sketchy, right? Because you go over bumps and your wheel turns a lot. And the reason it does that is because you've taken one arm off, so now your death grip has doubled on that other arm, and it's really bad. And it brings that awareness to you that a death grip is bad.
Well, that's it. It proves it makes you aware of two things. One, that relaxation is key, and two, that your control comes from your body, not from your appendages.
Yes, or proper control does. Yeah, exactly. Because you can fake that control with your hands on your bars, but it only gets you so far, because in tricky situations it bites you. So what they end up doing is they end up relaxing, and then I have to tell them, relax that arm. Make it so that, and I tell them the whole time, move your fingers around like a wave on your bars, right? Like that's how relaxed your hand should be, even when they're going through bumpy little rocky stuff. And then usually toward the top of it, all of them say, my abs hurt. I'm tired. Like my core is tired. And it's because they're learning to use that. And then we switch to the other hand. It's one thing that I feel like like we talked about, teaches you to ride with your core and through your trunk, I should say, is actually a more appropriate
Stabilize
term.
With your hips.
Yep, exactly. And it really helps. Yeah.
This goes to what the video we did with Lee, where we talked about not putting pressure like for me, if pressure through the bottom bracket, not through my hands, like pulling or something, because if you only have one hand and you have the pressure forward on it, you're going to turn. Exactly. And you get pressure back, you're going to turn the other way. Yeah. So that's a really good tip to be able to like get in the right position, but weighting your bike correctly.
Yes.
That's cool. It's all coming. That's cool.
And work your way into it. Like, if this is a situation where just riding on a road at first is where you want to feel comfortable, do that and work into your one-handed drills. I've even seen some coaches that
do this on the trainer too, for that matter.
Totally. Yeah, it's a good point. You can tell when you're bouncing around and unstable and you feel like there's a lot of pressure and, or I should say, strain going through your arm. You can relax that. I've seen people doing this also with criteriums, like teaching people to ride the criterium course one-handed. And the reason for that is, once again, teaching them to relax with their arms. But also, there are so many situations in a criterium where I have to take a hand and I just have to place it on somebody's hip to let them know, hey, I'm here. You know what I mean? And there's no telling when you need to do that. So
you just yell, watch out.
Yeah. Usually always gets a crazy reaction. What other ones, Chad?
If you're a mass start racer, and this applies to cyclocross racers, mountain bike racers, at least, especially in the early, the race starts, the earlier phases of races, certainly criterium riders, road riders and all that, but we do bumping drills. So, and these are obviously low speed, probably on the grass to start with.
Yes.
Probably on the grass the whole time, really. You can really actually have quite a lot of fun with it if you're not afraid of falling over. Mm-hmm. And it's just what it sounds. You just ride in a group of people, and it can be 2 riders, it can be 10, and just get comfortable with making body contact with people. And an alternative to that is jousting, where you actually physically try to knock each other off the bikes. Mm-hmm. Again, something to do on the grass and at low speeds, but it teaches you a whole lot of control, how to stay relaxed, how to stay in control of your bike when your body's all over the place, and that contact is not a bad thing. Contact is going to happen, and the more you're familiar with it, the less you're going to panic or tense up when it does.
Yeah, because it's probably the reaction that gets you, not the initial contact.
Yes,
exactly
absolutely right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
That's why when, for instance, when 2 riders make contact, the last thing you want to do is veer off one another. Whereas if you were to stay relaxed, you actually lean on each other for a second, not overreact, and regain control.
You might get kicked out of the Tour de France if you do that, though.
That's a good point.
So watch out.
We'll see if they stand by that this year again. Something with that too, I've seen really, really skilled riders. They'll even get into situations where they're like their bars are hooked on another rider, and you know what? And that's a bad time. Oh yeah. And those riders still stay super calm. And
yeah, if you can save that, you're a real good bike rider.
Another benefit of the bumping drills, now granted, you're falling on grass, hopefully, but it teaches you that falling over is not the worst thing in the world. Mm-hmm. It teaches you how to fall over and not just go straight onto your shoulder and your collarbone. It can teach you some stuff that basically makes you think, like when you're crashing, your life might not flash before your eyes in that moment, and you'll be able to be like, okay.
It can also teach you that you can save quite a lot in terms of, a lot of people just abandon hope. And as soon as that front wheel turns or they lose the front wheel or anything, they just give up. They just accept they're going to crash and that's it. I'm going down. But you watch Peter Sagan, you watch Ken Shillara, you watch these guys who are really good at avoiding those crashes and responding to bad situations. You can save a lot.
To me, cross really opened up my eyes on that because I got to the point where, like with a mud race, I'd crash a lot. But then it didn't hurt. And I'm like, well, I can save these, right?
Yeah. And along those lines, skids, that's another good thing to work on. I think that mountain biking and cross are great opportunities for this. With road riding, I wouldn't recommend working on it. It's okay to skid the rear end and stuff and get used to that and find that breaking point. But with mountain biking and cross, the reason that I like skidding and learning to use that, now I don't use it on trails. You have to be kind to trails. But the reason that I don't, or that I want to do that is because I want to be comfortable if I'm skidding. I don't want to think that it's all over, just like you guys mentioned.
And it's familiarization. You got to know that when you lose that rear tire, sometimes it's intentional, and even when it's not, again, it's something that can be saved. It's useful, and it's going to happen.
I went through a whole mountain bike season where I didn't skid. And then I did cross where I did skid, and I came back to mountain biking and felt comfortable. And it opens it up.
It's amazing.
Yeah, so it was a good tip.
Yeah, going into line choice too, and that's just kind of the last thing we want to cover on this, but and something that kind of plays into this is skinnies, they're called, which is basically just a board that you ride on or a bridge or something like that. And in mountain biking, you see them all in, it's like famous footage from British Columbia when they're in the forest and they ride those things. You can build your own, and all you need is a 2x4. But what we do with juniors a lot of the time is we'll bring out the 2x4 and we have them try to ride on it, and they fall off invariably very quickly. And then what we'll do is we'll take that 2x4 away, and then we'll just have them ride from me to you, right? Like just a straight line. And then you can see their tire track in the grass. And in most cases, it's like perfectly straight, right? And then you show them that, see, you're totally capable of riding straight. It's just chances are your focus is in the wrong spot. And then once you get them to look ahead and just to relax and just to ride, then they're able to stay right on.
It's the same with turning. You don't want to micromanage it and stare right in front of you, rather you look past it, and the control is just so much easier to attain.
Yeah. Let's cover some line choice stuff
well,
here.
Too, another parking lot, white. Yes, lines. That's another one, right? Yeah. That's easy to ride.
Yeah. Totally.
But if you're 6 inches off the ground, it's suddenly hard. Yeah. I don't know why.
It's kind of funny, right?
Yeah. Greater consequences.
Well, I have one more question about that.
Yeah.
How often would kids then, if you're on the skinny and you go off, do they like unclip and freak out rather than...
No, we teach them that too, like, because it's just a 2x4, and then we do have one situation where it's like, like maybe nearly a foot off the ground, right? And that one's just like a little bridge. But even then, they fall off of that, like their wheels fall off. But we teach them the same thing from Finding Nemo: just keep swimming, but just keep pedaling, right?
Yeah.
And you just keep pedaling, and they find out, oh, okay.
It's almost its own good drill.
Yeah,
like
totally
falling off of that and not freaking out.
Yeah, absolutely is. With line choice, so we've covered like a lot of things that can help, but if you have poor line choice, you're still going to be sketchy on the bike, especially in corners. And your main goal with a turn, theoretically in perfect circumstances, is to lessen the arc of the turn, right? In other words, to make it more broad, not make it as sharp. Mm-hmm. So the way that's usually done is looking at the turn and saying, enter as wide as I can, and then exit as wide as I can. And in most cases, what you'll do is you'll have in the center of that'll be the apex. And in most cases, you'll want to cut a short line through that turn, so that'll be close to the inside, right? That's an ideal situation. And in many cases, especially when we're talking cross and mountain biking or with road racing, there's a person in the way or a pothole or something else. You can't take that line. But in an ideal world, that's the one you want to take. And it allows you to preserve speed.
Which is really the overall objective. Yeah. The whole idea is to preserve speed. And by lessening that arc, it allows you to do exactly that.
Yeah, which means less effort coming out of the turn because you won't have to accelerate.
Usually greater traction, better traction.
Yep. Yeah, it's going to be better in most cases. Now, the edge cases that'll change this, though, ruts and cyclocross especially the recent World Cup with the sand, right? Plenty of ruts. But ruts, you're going to have bumps, rocks, surface that varies. For example, you might have a spot in a road one where you've got some gravel on a turn or in a certain spot. You should not be making your turn over that section where it's loose and gravelly, right, on top of the asphalt. And then off camber as well. You want to like weigh all of those things. So in an ideal world, yes, enter wide, hit the apex at the center on the inside, and then exit wide and maintain all that speed. But otherwise, you have to look at things and just think, okay, well, if I have a bump there, then I'm going to have to shift my line. And the main thing, though, with this, once again, we're talking about lines in a turn, and you have to look at those things long before you get to it, right? It's pretty straightforward. So,
yep, and with like the tighter turns on the mazes and whatnot, the off camber often enough, and usually some sort of challenging terrain, is to brake before the turn. We didn't mention that, but if you carry a bunch of speed into the turn and you're committed to the turn, and then you decide to get on the brakes, it's probably not going to go too well. Mm-hmm. Whereas if you just prior to the turn get on the brakes quickly, scrub off just a little bit of speed, and carry a little less speed into the turn, it's going to be a more controlled turn.
Yep.
So, and you can build up that sort of skill over time. Just learn how much speed you can carry through a turn. Start easy, something you can control and get right every time, and then build that confidence, and then of course carry greater and greater amounts of speed into those turns.
Yep. I recommend watching MotoGP or Formula One, and your line choice will improve. So it really helps. Next question, and this one is actually kind of the result of many questions that we've received over some time now about the differences between normalized power and average power. So we kind of wanted to go into something called Variability Index and explain the whole thing to you guys here. So Nate, I
can do this.
Yeah, this is definitely in your wheelhouse. What is average power?
Okay, so average power, also known as AP, is just simple average of your watts. Now, a key thing that people with different head units, and depending on what year you bought it and what software you have, is some head units will, you can have a setting, don't include zeros, which is, in my mind, the dumbest thing, should never be on there, ever. So what you want to do is always turn off make sure that it includes zeros. So whatever your head unit is, and because of that, what you can do is, if it doesn't include zeros, that means anytime I'm coasting and not putting out watts, don't include that in the average. But that'll make your average like a bajillion
It's not
watts.
A useful average.
Yeah.
Imagine going up a climb and then not pedaling going down. than going up the climb, not pedaling, going down. You're recovering that whole time, and it's not going to be representation.
Don't do it.
Yeah.
Okay, so then the next one is NP, or Normalized Power. So Normalized Power was developed by Dr. Andrew Coggin. Is it Coggin or?
Coggin.
Yeah, Coggin, right? And Normalized Power, Training Peaks then trademarked it later, and they use it. That's like the history of it. But basically, it's a weighted average of your power. And that was developed because of zeros and average power. So you're doing something like a criterium, you will get a very low average power relative to your effort level. Like you'll be putting out tons of power, but a low average power. Normalized Power weights the harder efforts more than the lower efforts, and it puts a lower weighting to the 0 watts. And the theory behind this is that Normalized Power generally will have, if you look at Normalized Power, it's a good way to compare workout to workout or time frame. And what that does is it
normalizes the physiologic cost.
Yep. So it should be like, supposedly it's what you could have done if you were averaged. If you were like, so if I had a race where in a crit, my average power was 220, but my normalized power was 300, theoretically, I should be able to ride 300 watts at that same,
that duration.
For that duration, yep.
That's the theory, yep.
There are some, it stands up pretty well.
Pretty well.
There are some caveats where they call them NP busters, and they're like extremely anaerobic efforts. If you do an NP buster, you probably know it, and I wouldn't really worry about that day to day.
Can I cover something on this really quick? Because we get a lot of people, I don't know, we have all seen this too, cyclocross. After a cyclocross race, we don't even feel like you're completely gassed, but your normalized power is still far lower than what it felt like, if that makes sense, like far lower than, like if you had just gone out and done a time trial and averaged 220 watts, it would have been very easy. But in this case, your normalized power might say 220. So there are some situations, and I know we've gotten a lot of questions. Yeah,
and you can't make perfect, but it's still pretty good.
Yeah. And so if you do see low normalized power after a race like cyclocross or something else, know that you're not alone. That's how it goes, and you kind of have to just isolate those ones, and separate them.
In the normalized power calculation, there's a 30-second rolling average, and because of that, don't look at normalized power for anything less than 5 minutes. I've heard Coggin actually say 20 or 30 minutes. Yeah. So I think our software, we limited at 5. We once raised it to 30. We got a lot of backlash.
Yeah.
So we did that. Really, it's best to look at for I like looking at it for my entire ride, not just little segments or intervals that I do inside of it.
Agreed.
There is one situation where you might get average power higher than normalized power. I know it sounds impossible, but the only one I've seen, and you can do, like this is mathematically possible, is if you're doing a shorter interval and you have something like a Wahoo kicker that artificially smooths your power output. So and you go from a very low wattage to a very high wattage, you do the interval, and then you go to a very low wattage. If you look at just that interval, and remember it's taking that 30 seconds before, you can get a higher average power than normalized power. And I think really indoor training with a Wahoo kicker is like the only situation you should ever have that. If you use just a power meter, I don't think you should ever get that. Outside, it's so variable, you'll never get that.
So you should.
And you only get it in real time, right? You wouldn't get it on a ride file.
No, you would get it so if you just looked at the normalized power for only that interval, and let's say you hit that target exactly right, our CTO explained to me once in math, and he's got a math degree, and I was like, okay, that sounds right.
Yeah.
But
it makes sense though.
It's possible only if you do, only if it's not very variable for the interval. And so the Wahoo kicker, because it smooths that data, is the only time.
But it's as a result of the kicker smoothing.
Exactly. So, yep. If you're a little more variable, it'll bump the normalized power up enough that it'll be different than the average power, or the same as the average power.
But you shouldn't see this on a ride file. Like you go and ride outside, your normalized power should never be lower than your average.
Yes, exactly. So if you do like an hour-long crit and for some reason your average power is higher than normalized, like something's wrong.
Something's up.
Yeah, something's up.
And if something's up, like one thing, and there are a lot of theories on this, whether it's smart pausing and you had something pause and throw something off and maybe didn't pair, who knows. Smart recording.
Oh yeah, that's another one.
Turn
smart recording off.
Yep.
I don't think, unless you're a RAM rider, you really don't need smart recording. And that means smart recording is the ability to only record something every 3 seconds or 5 seconds instead of every second. And usually when we say recording every second, what we're doing is sampling. So a power meter might output power data 4 times a second, but what we'll do is sample. So at a second interval, will then collect whatever the data was at that second. And what smart recording does is changes that interval from every second to every 5 seconds, or I think it goes even more.
Just to extend memory or data storage?
It's more battery power.
Oh, okay.
But now head units are so good, like their battery power is many hours, right? So as long as you have a fresh battery, you should be fine. And I think the lack of data, you want more data always. So turn off smart recording. That's another way where you could get in trouble and have weird numbers.
Weird numbers. How about power smoothing? Can you explain that? Because a lot of people, they question if power smoothing is affecting their data like this.
So there's smart recording and there's power smoothing. Smart recording is actually recording the data, but power smoothing is changing the display of the data. So like on a Garmin, you can have a 3 second, a 5 second, I think like a 30 second power smoothing. In TrainerRoad 2, we let you choose how many seconds you're power smoothing. That only reflects the display. So not the recording. And that's better. What that will help is, again, that like on TrainerRoad, if we get an update once every 4 times a second, we display every output on the display, like on your head unit or on the software. Yeah, exactly. And what power smoothing, I like a little 5 second power smoothing. What that does is it makes it a little less jumpy. And if you're trying to, it's a little easier mentally to get that average in, because really your power meters, like nobody is perfectly smooth.
Yeah, nobody's smooth. That's how it works.
We also get this question a lot too. Someone will switch to a kicker, then switch away from a kicker. I just saw someone else write an article on this too.
Yeah.
And they'll be frustrated because with a kicker, it says that they're like 0 or 1 watts different than the target. But then with a power meter, they'll go like up 10 and below 10, and we'll kind of go up and down like this. And really, while you're riding the kicker, your power is doing that, but the display is showing you something different. Exactly. So going back to Matt Fitzgerald too, it's like maybe it is a feature because you worry about it less. Or it's hard to go to the kicker then back. I think if you've never been on a kicker, you don't feel that, or if you've used a power meter with a kicker the whole time. So just you can change power smoothing and it doesn't affect it. Another thing is with the graph that you're looking at, I'm going deep, guys.
It's fine. It's good. It's good.
Okay, so let's say you're looking at a 5-hour ride, right? And every hour ride will have 3,600 points, right? 3,600 seconds. So that means 3,600 points. You have a 5-hour ride, that's 5 times that, right? So a lot of points. If your screen, let's say, has 1,280 pixels of resolution across, and you put all of those points in it, what will happen is you will have it'll pretty much look like someone had a marker, and it'll be really thick. You won't be able to look at your results and tell what's happening. So on displays, like graphs afterwards, we'll smooth that data. And usually we'll smooth that data based on the resolution of the screen, so you can still kind of see the shape of your workout. We have a new thing coming out fairly soon. Probably, I don't want to say it's very soon, with a way, I think, best in class analytics for analyzing a workout, right? And we're gonna have the ability to zoom in on data that's really good, so that you can see, if you zoom in enough where you have enough pixels, then you can see the per second recording. But just so you know that the display data is going to be smooth in just about every platform. If you don't, you'll tell because it just looks like a big scribble mark. And that is not adjusting the way the data is recorded, just the way that it's seen.
Yeah, and just one last thing, it's very normal to see your normalized power be higher than your average power. I see people sometimes writing and wondering.
99.9%.
Exactly, and they're wondering why is it so different with more variability in the effort, as in big hard efforts like that. Like Nate mentioned, there's some situations where it's so much that they'll call it like an NP buster because it over-represents perhaps. But the difference between that normalized power and that average power is something that we call Variability Index, or VI. And it's typical, like in a time trial or a bike split in a triathlon, you should be looking for something between 1 to 1.05 for your variability index.
A really well-paced effort will be like a 1.01, 1.02. That says you are super smooth.
And all that is normalized power divided by average power, right?
I believe Friel came up with that too. I don't think that was Coggins. I'm not sure. I'm going to get yelled at. I think it was Friel, but I'm not sure. But I think Friel did it to actually then tell his triathletes, Joe Friel, famous coach, big triathlete coach, to be like, you didn't pace this correctly. He wanted to measure. And that's the ratio between those two numbers.
Yep. And in like something like a typical road race or a criterium, you'd see somewhere around 1.1, maybe even up to as high as something like 1.3 if it's super surgy. But if it's something that's above 1.3, maybe your mountain bike, cyclocross, something like that. But once again, cyclocross has its own issues with all the coasting time that you have. So if you're seeing numbers that are far above that, or if you're seeing something that's a negative or a below 1.0 variability index, then chances are something's a little weird.
Yep.
So hopefully that gave everybody like a direct walkthrough on that one. Sean, he says, I'm from Lancashire in the UK. I weigh 63.5 kilograms and my current FTP is around 285 watts. I started time trialing this year by using TrainerRoad to train, and I saw gradual improvements over the season and smashed my goal times for both 10-mile and 25-mile distances. I also got on the podium for my age category in 2 events, which I was pleased as punch with. Nice. I like that saying, pleased as punch. That's good. As the season comes near its end, we have a short but brutal hill climb event season, which are essentially time trials up many of our short but very steep hills. I want this tradition here in the States. I don't know why the UK is the only one that has it. That would be really fun, right?
I don't.
Yeah, criterium plans and try to... So, forgive me, he says that... he's working on with the climbing road race plan and criterium plans, and he's trying to add a bit of injection into his diesel physiology. So I assume that he's implying that he's a steady state
power
guy. Yeah.
He wants to add some kick to it.
Yeah. He says, as I near my main events for the hill climbs, I noticed that the taper workouts are approximately 45 minutes in length and have quite short cooldowns. And as I'm now 45 years old, I find that if I only have a short warm-up and a short cooldown, my legs are quite sore the next day. So I usually keep spinning for 8 to 10 minutes. I started to wonder, though, is this altering the intended effect of these said shorter workouts? But then I thought, if Chris Froome always insists on a 10-minute zone 1 cooldown, it can't do me any harm. I'd like to know, though, if I am wasting my time and adding an extra cooldown to these taper workouts. Many thanks for TrainerRoad on the podcast. Both have helped me change the way I ride, and now more productive and faster. Cool.
Yeah, so one of the downsides of the pretty narrow windows we try to get our workouts done within is that we have to shortchange something. I've talked about this before. Last thing I want to do is shortchange the warm-up because that comes at the expense of the rest of the workout. Can't shortchange the main set. I mean, that is the workout. So it typically falls that the cool down is whatever's left. Mm-hmm. And sometimes that's as short as a minute. I always make the assumption that if riders want to cool down, they're simply going to cool down. And I know we have plans to enable some option at some point in time that will allow you to extend the cooldown super quickly, really easily. I probably shouldn't have said anything. It'll be at some point that'll be available.
I just gave Chad a death look.
But in any case, cooldowns are absolutely not a waste of time, and there is a reason that Sky does it. First off, there's no ill effect to it. I mean, you're talking another 10 minutes on your ride. That's not going to add up to any significant amount of TSS or additional stress that you should be avoiding, not even on a taper ride. It's also a super good time to start your post-workout nutrition if you're really concerned with reloading glycogen and just basically avoiding some of the downsides of carbohydrate denial, which I'm all too familiar with. It's a really good time to get that rolling. But I think the reason Team Sky supports it so much and it's become part of Chris Froome's post-race pattern. I mean, every race you see him on the trainer afterward. Yeah, every time. Is because it enables basically recovery of your endocrine system or lymph removal. And there's a lot of things that spike during the workout. Epinephrine, norepinephrine, a lot of catecholamines, cortisol rises, obviously lactate comes up. These are all things that take a long time to normalize, and you can facilitate that process a bit by doing a cool down. And this is of keen importance if you're going to bed right afterwards. Last thing you want is all these things ramped up and you're going to try to get into bed because that's going to make for some fitful sleeping at best. On top of that, that poor sleep is going to further exacerbate your issues with cortisol. And cortisol, after the fact, when we don't need it there, it's rather harmful. So a lot of these things are improved. So the removal of them from the system, it takes place just that much quicker. So for that reason alone, basically what you're doing is you're facilitating muscle repair. That is the big get with this, and I think that's why you are sore the next day when you bypass your cooldown.
Yeah. Now, and this isn't to say that somebody might be able to do just fine with a 5-minute cooldown, right? Like it doesn't necessarily have to be
Is what it is. I mean, if you wake up the next day and you're sore, 5 minutes probably wasn't sufficient. And it also, it has something to do with the composition of the workout too. Microbursts versus, working at 60%. You're probably not going to need much of a cooldown after a butter burner ride as opposed to something that's highly intense.
And age too, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Will it have effect? I know warm-up with age, usually older you get.
Warm-up seems to take quite a bit longer. I've noticed that personally, and I've read quite a bit about that. As far as the cool-down, tying to age.
So what we recommend on TrainerRoad, the easiest way to do it is once your workout's done, you go to workouts, you type in FREE, free, and there's a whole bunch of free rides. Just click, push the button, push start, and you're back in it.
Yep.
And then you can do whatever kind of the length of cooldown that you want. Some people like a 30-minute cooldown, and you can get a 10-minute cooldown, whatever you want. But basically, Chad, you're saying there's benefits to cooldown. What percentage of FTP would be an effective cooldown?
I would say anything over 50%. I'd prefer
under.
50.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Under 50.
Yeah,
right?
Do nothing over 50%.
Great.
Yep. So keep it under 50% of threshold. I'd prefer riders were more at like 40, even 30%. All you're trying to do is spin your legs, keep the blood circulating.
We've talked about the like the golden window of getting nutrition in 20 minutes after intense exercise. And I'm pretty anal and about the details, but this was before, and I used to do like climbs up Geiger, which is over here, and Geiger's like a 40-minute one, and it would take me 20 minutes to descend, and then you got to go home. And I thought, you know what? I should probably take my drink as soon as you climb, right? Get to the top, then do it, because the window's gone, like on the descent. I know that's carrying your recovery drink in your pocket, but that's what
That's awesome.
yeah, exactly, right? That's very native to me. But especially the longer ones like Mount Rose, it could take 30 minutes to get home from that. So that always messed me up. So Trainer's better because right afterwards you can drink it. The other one I find out if I have an extended recovery, I feel so accomplished. While you've done a really hard workout, and then before I've moved on my brain and I'm like worried about the other things I have to do in my day, but I've like rewarded with this like 80-watt, 100-watt spin.
Bask in the post-workout flow.
I'm just like, I did it. I did it. Especially if it was a hard workout.
Yeah.
Having that easy.
Feels good.
It feels good. Yeah. I want to like extend it for like 2 hours.
Yeah. Still in the afterglow.
Yep.
Brett says, and this is going to be the last question for today. He says, can you talk about the effect of changing your crank length? This is another one that we is commonly debated.
It's a very contentious issue.
It is. He says, my special snowflake story in summary. I spent the past 9 months recovering from a lower back injury, which has left me with tight hip flexors. I'm wondering if smaller cranks would help, and figured crank length may be a general question that others may wonder about. And certainly others do wonder about this. Thanks and love your show and TrainerRoad. So just specifically in his case, what I'm looking at here is the fact that, if he has lower back pain, or I should say he got that surgery there, and then he has tight hip flexors as a result, or he's recovering from that injury, I should say. If anything, you would probably not want to have shorter crank arms in that situation, right? So something that we see, and actually let me take a step back. So the whole crank arm thing, there's, we'll get into like more of the specifics, but I want to address the fact that you see a lot of triathletes talking about crank length more, I find, or time trialists more than anybody else. And usually the main reason for that is hip angle. Like, you've got a really flat back, a deep hinge in your waist or in your hips. So then as a result, what you're trying to do is you're trying to get your knees out from your shoulders instead of hitting your chest, right?
Yeah, so in this case, I think he is right with at least his thinking, and the shorter cranks mean less hip flexion. It
certainly would, right? So shorter cranks would mean that you would be able to you wouldn't have as severe of a fold. That said, let's keep things in context.
Yes.
So we're looking at, in most cases today, most cranks, and I know that there are outliers, but most cranks are 170, 172.5, or 175.
Yeah, so we're talking a 5 millimeter margin.
Yeah, so if you're making that with your fingers, we're talking like that much. That's a really small amount.
Yeah,
it's pretty small. Now, that said, I know that there are 177.5s, I know there are 180s, I know that they're above that, and I know that it goes all the way down to like 140 possibly on crank length as well. It's tough to find those cranks. We're talking about usually what people are using is somewhere in between 170 to 175. So when you think about it in that respect, slightly rolling your pelvis back or slightly, lifting up just a bit is probably going to have a more profound effect.
Moving on the saddle, softening your elbows. I mean, really any change in body position is probably going to negate anything that you would get. I just have a hard time believing that the difference of 5 millimeters is going to make any significant difference in the case of tight hip flexors or low back pain.
I did a 10 millimeter change for triathlon, and it did feel different. Like it felt more open, but I didn't have. Going back to the beginning of the podcast, we're going to circle.
Performance improved.
My performance did not improve.
Did low back pain.
I didn't have any low. It was supposed to be so I didn't because my knees were hitting my chest. They didn't hit my chest anymore, but I didn't have any more aggressive position, and I didn't have any more
increase in power output.
Exactly, I didn't go any faster. I just spent a lot of money.
Such a small change. I'd love to see. I mean, I've checked out a couple of studies, and there's nothing that steers you one way or the other. Really, there are people who feel very strongly about this matter, but again, steer me towards something that's meaningful. Show me a study that helps me understand why this is a big deal.
Yeah. Now, one thing to keep in mind with crank length. Remember that your bottom bracket can't move, but you are effectively making your cranks longer. And I've heard of people changing their crank length and not changing their saddle height. And if you change your crank length, you should change your saddle height in direct relation to that length increase, right? Because basically you're making your leg drop further down if you're getting a longer crank, or you're making that leg drop not as far down if you're getting a shorter crank arm. So if you're in a situation where you are changing that, make sure that your saddle height is changing in direct proportion with that.
The only time I can think of that it's beneficial is one, mountain biking, because of shorter cranks you get better clearance.
Yeah, so less pedal strikes.
Yep. Cross. If you're getting strikes in cross, which you might over barriers, you could try shorter crank lengths, but I wouldn't do that until you actually have that problem. Or crit riding. Have you guys ever clipped a clit on a corner?
Yeah.
That is frightening.
Yeah, I'm not sure 5 millimeters even in that case is going to save me
a whole lot. But hey,
I mean, when you hit it hard enough to skip your wheel, you're more than 5 millimeters.
Yeah, you're getting down
invested into the
arm.
asphalt there.
Pretty much. You know what you should do is actually, I think in a crit is just not don't pedal through that corner.
That's a strong argument.
Yeah.
Now I hear a lot of people saying leverage. Yes, technically, if you have a lot longer, have a longer crank arm, technically, yes.
So many people come up to me and are like, "Oh, you got long femurs. You must be a great cyclist." Then Yao Ming would be on the Tour de France, just destroying people, right? Like,
It's something to add to this. Like, yes, technically, you have more leverage, but at the same time, and I talked to my brother about this for a while. He's a mechanical engine nerd to the nth degree, right? Always geeking out about leverage and mechanics and bikes especially. And we talked a lot about this. And in the end, any mechanical advantage you get with greater leverage,
you got to go farther.
It's hard. Exactly right. So you're moving more tissue, right, in a further direction with that pedal stroke. You're also using muscles in a different way. In most cases, it ends up being nullified, that leverage advantage, when we're talking about this small margin.
Yeah, it's the power output. So if you go to a shorter crank, you're actually going to have to spin faster to get the same amount of power. And if you get to a larger crank, you spin slower because you're traveling a longer distance to carry that torque. It seems weird, but you don't. I think we would. A lot of people say like, "Oh, I get a longer crank or longer arms." We would have seen lots of studies that then demonstrate this. That yes, you can put out more power. Again, what is the result?
Aerodynamics is a really good example. Look at TT bikes now compared to TT bikes like 10 years ago. They're almost like it's all homogenized. Like they look very similar, right? In certain we would see a mass movement towards something, I guess, is the point that I'm getting at.
Sometimes.
So Brett, well, your issue is tight hip flexors. It's not crank length. So basically you need to address that. And I think we've talked about it before, but obviously stretching, rolling your hip flexors, rolling your quads.
It's going to make life way more comfortable if you do that too, and in your different crank length will not make life more comfortable.
Key. Get Chad, you nailed it.
Yeah.
Don't worry about the equipment. Just get the hip flexors less tight.
Oh yeah,
and your whole life will be better.
That's all this is about.
Yep.
You're not a special snowflake, Brett. Sorry, not on this.
Everyone,
because I'm one too. Then.
Me too.
Yep. All right. Thanks everybody for joining us. You can submit your questions once again to TrainerRoad.com/podcast, and we will talk to everybody next week. Thanks everybody.
Thanks everybody.
Bye-bye.